The message arrived not with thunder or fire, but quietly, almost carelessly, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon at my boutique in Vancouver. Outside, rain laced the windows with silver streaks, blurring the mannequins in the display as though they were weeping. I was arranging a row of cashmere scarves, my hands moving with the precision of habit, when my phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up, expecting a routine message from Daniel, my husband of 12 years. Perhaps an excuse about working late again, or a trivial note about dinner. Instead, what stared back at me were words so cold and abrupt they could have split glass. "I'm leaving you. I'm moving to Miami with Sophie. She's 20. She makes me feel alive again. I've emptied our joint account, haha. Don't bother trying to stop me." The letters seemed to glow against the screen, cruel in their simplicity, but my hands did not shake. My breath did not falter. A customer, Mrs. Thompson, was still browsing near the mirror, admiring the cut of a jacket. My voice, calm and even, carried across the room as I complimented her choice, wrapped her purchase in silver paper, and handed it over with a smile. Only after the bell chimed and she disappeared into the rain did I allow myself to look again at the message. Daniel thought he had detonated my life with a single text. He imagined me collapsing, abandoned, powerless. What he never understood was that I had been preparing for this moment for months. The signs of betrayal had been falling like autumn leaves long before that day. His sudden obsession with the gym, the late nights at the office that did not match his payslips, the phone clutched to him like a secret. He bought shirts too slim for his aging frame, sprayed cologne as though it could mask the scent of lies. At first, I convinced myself it was midlife panic, a harmless attempt to cling to youth. But then I found the receipts: 2 dinners for 2 at restaurants where I had never been. A hotel reservation at the Fairmont Pacific Rim during a weekend when he had claimed to be sick in bed. I did not confront him. Confrontation would have given him the drama he craved, the satisfaction of watching me unravel. Instead, I acted in silence. I opened a new bank account across the city, using my maiden name. Into it went my savings. The profits from my boutique profits Daniel had always belittled as pocket change from a little shop. He never realized that the boutique earned more than his middle management salary, or that its foundation was stronger than the fragile image of success he wrapped around himself. When I discovered the hotel charge 3 months before, I contacted a lawyer. I explained everything, my voice steady even then. She advised me to separate my assets fully, to collect evidence, to prepare as though the day would come when his betrayal would no longer be rumor but fact. So I did. I gathered documents, saved screenshots of text messages, photographed receipts. Each detail was tucked away like ammunition. So when Daniel finally delivered his announcement with a smug ha-ha, I did not shatter. I poured myself a glass of Malbec in the quiet of my boutique's upstairs office and smiled. He believed he had outplayed me. In reality, he had just triggered the trap I had built. That night, I gathered everything I would need: the deed to my grandmother's house, safely in my name alone, proof of inheritance immune to marital claims, the incorporation papers of my boutique, showing my sole ownership, bank records that revealed I had already transferred the bulk of my savings away from his reach. Daniel thought he had stolen everything. He had taken nothing but bait. The next morning, I woke to a barrage of texts. He gloated about Sophie, about their flight to Miami, about how I would have my little shop to keep me busy while my age crept up on me. Each message reeked of arrogance, dripping with the certainty that I was broken. I saved them all. Every cruel syllable, every confession of theft and desertion. Then I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. The papers were filed before noon: divorce proceedings, citing financial misconduct and abandonment. Daniel had provided us with evidence so blatant that even a novice judge would see through him. But I was not finished. His final message the night before had mentioned using the joint credit card to book flights and a hotel. That detail became my blade. I called the credit card company, reported the charges as fraudulent, and forwarded the proof, his own words confessing to the act. By the time the representative finished canceling everything, Daniel and Sophie's grand escape was nothing more than vapor. I imagined them at the airport, luggage in hand, his chest puffed with triumph, only to discover the tickets invalid. I imagined Sophie's confusion, her disappointment, the first crack in the fantasy he had promised her. I pictured Daniel's rage boiling in the check-in line, his pride collapsing in front of strangers. And I felt nothing but calm. By afternoon, his messages had shifted. The arrogance turned to anger, then to panic. He accused me of sabotage, of cruelty, of ruining his happiness. Each word was another stone I added to the fortress of evidence I was building. I did not respond. Silence was more powerful than any retort. The silence enraged him further, but it steadied me. For years, Daniel had relied on my reactions to fuel his control. Now I gave him none. That evening, his mother called. Her voice was sharp, accusing. Daniel had told them I was cold, controlling, that I had driven him away. She claimed I was vindictive, interfering with his plans. I listened as I rearranged a display of winter coats in the boutique window. I did not argue, did not plead. I knew the truth would reveal itself in time. Family loyalty might protect him for a while, but evidence was stronger than blood. By the end of the week, the cracks in Daniel's story were visible even to those who had once defended him. Word spread among friends and acquaintances that he and Sophie were stranded in a budget motel near the airport, their luxury dreams reduced to peeling wallpaper and flickering lamps. His credit cards were maxed, his savings depleted, his bravado slipping. Sophie began posting cryptic notes on social media, complaints about toxic relationships, hints of regret. The fairy tale was already souring. Meanwhile, my boutique flourished. Clients arrived with sympathy hidden in their purchases, many buying more than they intended. Some whispered encouragement. Others simply squeezed my hand as though passing along strength. What Daniel had dismissed as a trivial hobby was becoming a beacon. I spent my nights refining binders of evidence, bank records, texts, deeds, incorporation papers. Each page was a weapon, each folder a shield. My lawyer praised the thoroughness, reminding me that Daniel's arrogance had written the case against himself. By the time the emergency hearing was scheduled, I was ready. Daniel would be served at his motel, the final insult to his pride. He had imagined himself escaping to Miami with his young mistress, leaving me to drown in betrayal. Instead, he was cornered in a dingy room, about to be stripped of everything he thought he controlled. The betrayal had been the lightning strike. Now came the storm. The courthouse in downtown Vancouver stood like a monument carved from stone and rain, its granite steps slick beneath the gray October sky. I walked up those steps not as a victim, but as a woman carrying the full weight of truth in carefully prepared binders. Inside my briefcase were documents that told a story far more devastating than Daniel's careless text ever could: bank statements, property deeds, incorporation papers, screenshots of every gloating message he had sent. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and history, as though the walls themselves had absorbed generations of betrayal and justice. I sat beside my lawyer at the polished oak table, the binders neatly stacked before us. My pulse was steady. This was the battlefield I had prepared for, and I knew the ground better than he did. Daniel entered with Sophie trailing behind him. His attempt at youth clung to him like an ill-fitting costume, jeans too tight, a blazer that strained at the seams, hair slicked back in a style meant for someone decades younger. His confidence, however, had already begun to falter. Sophie looked diminished under the fluorescent lights, her expression caught between defiance and regret. She did not sit beside him. Instead, she lingered at the door, as if distance might shield her from the humiliation about to unfold. When the judge entered, silence fell like a curtain. The proceedings began. My lawyer rose, her voice carrying the precision of steel. She began with the text messages, Daniel's own words, projected onto the courtroom screen for all to see. Each message dripped with arrogance. I've emptied the account. Ha ha. Don't bother begging. You'll be fine with your little shop. His cruelty echoed through the chamber, leaving no room for interpretation. These were not the words of a man seeking fairness. They were confessions of betrayal, admissions of fraud, evidence written in his own hand. Next came the receipts. Hotel bills during weekends he had sworn he was sick at home, restaurant charges for two when he claimed to be working late, the first-class tickets to Miami and the luxury suite at the Royal Palm Hotel, all booked with the joint credit card. All canceled after my report. Then the property documents, the deed to my grandmother's house, preserved in my name alone, untouched by his grasp. The incorporation papers of my boutique, proof that every dollar invested had been mine. Daniel's lawyer attempted to twist the narrative. He argued that Daniel had been rash, emotional, seeking only a clean break. He insisted that because my boutique had grown during the marriage, Daniel deserved a share. He claimed the joint account was as much Daniel's as mine, that draining it was not theft, but simply his right. But each argument fell apart under the weight of evidence. My lawyer countered with clarity. Rashness did not excuse financial misconduct. Emotions did not justify theft. The boutique was documented as separate property, established before the marriage, funded solely by me. Every receipt, every ledger, every transfer stood as proof. The judge's questions cut through Daniel's defenses like knives. Did he deny emptying the joint account? Did he deny booking luxury travel with a mistress using shared funds? Did he deny mocking his wife in written admissions of betrayal? Daniel stammered, shifting in his seat, clinging to weak words like joke and misunderstanding. But the judge pressed harder, his patience dwindling. When Daniel finally admitted to the charges, the courtroom seemed to exhale. His arrogance collapsed into silence. The judge ordered all shared assets frozen and demanded the return of the drained funds within 24 hours. Daniel protested that the money was gone, spent. The judge silenced him with a glare, declaring that his recklessness was no shield against responsibility. Outside the chamber, Sophie leaned against the wall, scrolling through her phone with trembling hands. She no longer looked like the prize he had thrown his life away for. She looked like a young woman realizing she had tied herself to a sinking ship. She slipped away quietly before the session ended, leaving Daniel to face his ruin alone. The proceedings stretched through the afternoon, every attempt by Daniel's lawyer weaker than the last, every counter-argument from my side fortified by documentation. When the gavel struck to adjourn, the verdict was clear. Daniel's actions were not just betrayal, but misconduct. He had gambled everything on arrogance and lost. I walked out of the courthouse into the crisp air of Vancouver, the harbor gleaming in the distance, the North Shore mountains standing tall against the fading light. Behind me, Daniel remained slumped at the table, a man who had once imagined himself in control, now cornered by his own hubris. News of the trial spread quickly. Friends who had once whispered sympathy for Daniel now avoided his calls. His mother, once sharp in her accusations against me, phoned again with a voice cracked by regret. She admitted she had seen the messages, had read the receipts, had realized the truth. She sounded broken, ashamed of the son she had defended, but her guilt was not mine to carry. Sophie vanished from Daniel's life within weeks, her social media filled with cryptic posts about mistakes and lessons. Rumors swirled that she had returned to school, determined to rebuild a life untainted by scandal. For Daniel, however, the collapse only deepened. His company reprimanded him formally, stripping him of projects, closing the door to promotions. His finances were gutted, his debts mounting. He returned to Calgary, moving into his childhood bedroom, surrounded by relics of a youth he could never reclaim. I, on the other hand, thrived. The boutique's sales surged, boosted by women who saw in me a reflection of resilience. Customers came not just to shop, but to support, to stand with a woman who had refused to be destroyed. Local media began to take notice, framing my story not as gossip, but as a lesson in independence. My face appeared in magazines, not as a scorned wife, but as an entrepreneur. What Daniel had dismissed as a hobby had become a symbol. Each purchase, each article, each expansion was a nail in the coffin of the narrative he had tried to write for me. He had wanted me diminished, broken, forgotten. Instead, I was building something larger than either of us had ever imagined. The trial had been the climax of his downfall, but for me, it was only the beginning of a new chapter. And as the leaves turned on the trees of Vancouver, swirling gold and red against the gray sky, I walked through the city with my head held high. The storm had passed. The skies were clearing. The betrayal had become my liberation. The weeks after the trial were like sunlight breaking through after a long storm. The judgment had not only secured my assets, but had turned the tide of perception. What Daniel once painted as cruelty and coldness was now revealed as foresight, preparation, and strength. The gossip that had once swirled against me transformed into admiration. My boutique, which had always been the quiet cornerstone of my life, suddenly became a beacon. Women came in droves, some to shop, some simply to stand within the walls of a business that had survived betrayal and emerged stronger. They whispered encouragement, pressed my hands, told me stories of their own losses and recoveries. Each sale, each conversation, each nod of solidarity lifted me further above the wreckage Daniel had tried to bury me in. By spring, I opened a second boutique in Toronto. The launch was covered by local media, not with the cheap scent of scandal, but with the polished tone of entrepreneurship. Articles framed me as a visionary, a woman who had turned personal chaos into professional triumph. I smiled in photographs, standing beside mannequins dressed in my curated collections, the caption beneath reading "From Betrayal to Business Empire." Meanwhile, Daniel's life contracted into shadows. His career unraveled as the reprimand at his company grew into permanent sidelining. The promotion he once bragged about slipped away, replaced by rumors of demotion. His finances collapsed further, each debt compounding on the last. And Sophie, his bright, young flame, was gone, leaving behind only regret and whispers of lessons learned. I heard through acquaintances that Daniel had returned to Calgary, retreating into the small bedroom of his parents' house. A man stripped of pride and independence. His mother called me again, her voice heavy with sorrow. She admitted that Daniel still spoke venomously of me, still blamed me for his downfall, still refused to acknowledge the ruin he had caused himself. But his blame no longer touched me. I had long since stopped carrying the weight of his failures. My boutiques flourished. Montreal followed Toronto, then Ottawa. Each city added another jewel to the crown of my brand, each expansion a testament to survival turned into growth. By the third year, my boutiques employed dozens. My name graced business magazines. My words carried in conferences where young women looked to me as a guide. At one such conference in Ottawa, I stood before hundreds, telling them what betrayal had taught me: that independence was not paranoia, that preparation was not coldness, that self-protection was not selfishness, but wisdom. I spoke of contracts, of separate accounts, of trust backed by prudence. And the room erupted in applause. Not for the pain I had endured, but for the strength that had carried me beyond it. Daniel's shadow occasionally flickered across my path. Mutual friends shared whispers of failed ventures, gambling debts, new relationships that soured. He had become a cautionary tale, a man defined not by his career or charm, but by his collapse. His attempts at rebuilding crumbled because he carried bitterness instead of accountability. He never learned the lesson his downfall offered. And still, I did not gloat. My revenge was not in his misery but in my success. My boutiques thrived, my employees grew, my brand became a household name in cities across Canada. Where Daniel had tried to reduce me to nothing, I had built an empire. On the 5th anniversary of my first boutique, I hosted a gala in Vancouver. The store was unrecognizable from its early days, expanded, gleaming, filled with laughter and champagne. Guests clinked glasses beneath chandeliers, music floated through the air, and every wall seemed to hum with triumph. In my office upstairs, away from the celebration, hung a single frame the text message Daniel had sent that rainy afternoon. "I'm leaving you. I've emptied the account. Ha ha." Beneath it, a plaque I had commissioned, "Success is the best revenge." I stood before it with a glass of champagne, watching my reflection shimmer in the glass. Outside, the harbor sparkled, the city lights glowing against the black water. I thought of the woman I had been that day, the steady hands wrapping Mrs. Thompson's scarf, the calm voice carrying through betrayal, the quiet strength that had prepared for a storm. That woman had carried me here, across 5 years of growth, into a life richer and stronger than I had ever imagined. Daniel still lived in the shadows of his own making, still clung to stories of glory days that had long since faded. He remained in the confines of his parents' home, scrolling through the wreckage of a life squandered. But he was no longer part of my story. His cruelty had not ended me, it had begun me. For me, the text he had sent was never the ending he intended, it was the beginning. I lifted my glass, not to him, not to vengeance, but to myself, to survival, to strength, to the truth that the sweetest revenge is not destruction, but success. And as the night shimmered around me, I knew with unshakable certainty that I had won. Thank you for watching and welcome to the Revenge Diaries. If you enjoyed this story, we'd truly appreciate a like and subscribe to keep us motivated to bring you more. Wishing you a wonderful and positive day ahead.